Awesome call-in radio show number 22. Today we talked a lot about very disparate topics. We had a caller call in and ask about, what are normal total and free testosterone levels. We had one of our community members talk about, what's optimal in terms of training frequency twice a week. And I talked about sort of the benefits of 5 day a week, full body, training routines. We had a caller call in and ask what they can do in terms of if they can't go right outside, is there a way of doing cardio at home? We talked about some YouTube-based programs as well. And then we talked about rites of passages and the importance of that for men in modern times. So awesome. And we also talked about how do you find a great mental health practitioner and psychologist in terms of my rules of thumbs for that. Hey everyone, welcome to Maximus Call-In Radio Show number 22. Super excited to have everyone on today, and we're actually exploring, thanks to one of our callers from Clubhouse, Andrew, Twitter Spaces for the first time. So thanks to Michael and Retta who are listening in through Twitter Spaces, which is now available to everyone today. We got Andrew and Ben and Joshua on Clubhouse, so you can feel free to come up if you'd like to speak. Thanks to everyone who's joining us on Instagram. It looks like we got a couple followers there. Hey Kamal, and thanks to our most loyal listeners who are listening on Discord as well. Looks like we got a couple folks and regulars: Ben, Greg, Jared, Michael, PK, and Ryan. Thanks for joining us. We always, as always, prioritize folks who want to ask any questions live. The theme of the show is mind, body, and masculinity. I'm a clinical psychologist and psychiatry professor, and I have a specialty in men's health and performance optimization, given sort of the focus of the company. So if you have any questions about how to take your health to the next level, if you want to ask any questions about diet, exercise, sleep, focus, or relationships, we've been getting a lot of dating questions and advice lately. Happy to do that as well.
So one of my fitness objectives is to be able to run 1.5 miles in 10 minutes or less. So can you recommend any running programs, or do you have any ideas on how to achieve that? I'm probably hitting around 11 minutes and 30 right now.
It's an awesome goal. I love how concrete it is. How did you come up with that?
It's one of the requirements for the police fitness test here in Ontario.
That makes sense. I was like, that's so specific, because I actually used to run competitively, and I was like, we never really run a mile and a half. But I guess that sounds makes sense for in terms of a particular challenge. Well, to start out with, what are you doing right now to train for it? I'm curious if you have a particular program or regimen that you're doing right now, and how has it worked for you to kind of get to your progress of hitting, sounds like 10 and a half.
Yeah, I don't have anything specific going on right now. I was going to try and do like interval sprints to try and get, because it's mostly a sprint, right, for me. I've done multiple, rounds of it, and I've been getting better, but I guess I'm not on a structured program, just running the actual 1.5 miles as fast as you can.
Yeah, I mean, you're talking about training for a distance of a mile and a half, which is, in track, there's usually the mile and the 2 mile, and obviously in international events, there's everything is in meters. But it's really a distance event, actually. It's not so much of a sprint to be able to keep that up for, 10 minutes, or ideally under 10 minutes in terms of your goal. So there's a lot of good programs that are out there, but I'll tell you sort of like the basic fundamental principles that you may want to, generally follow. Like if you're doing any sort of distance running, a lot of the sort of the common programs use sort of distance running or having endurance as a base. So you are trying to get a certain number of miles in a week. The reason that's helpful is, one, it sort of trains your muscles, tendons, and ligaments to just kind of withstand, the pounding and kind of build up their endurance in order to maintain that for 10 minutes. I'll give you a concrete example. So like I said, I used to run competitively. So when I was running competitively, we would, on the low side, be running 20 to 30 miles a week. On the high side, about 50 miles a week. So that's generally what you see for people who are like competing at that at that distance. And if you're talking about Olympians, they're running like 100 plus, especially if they're doing like longer sort of distances. I don't think you need to do that for the purposes. I mean, you just need to pass this test and hopefully move on with your life. But you should be getting in like kind of a base amount of mileage per week. I would say probably on the low end, you definitely want to be doing, I would say 10 minimum, up to 30. That might be like sort of a healthy range in order to, just kind of train your muscles, tendons, and ligaments to be in sort of proper shape to do that. The other thing that it does is it kind of builds mitochondrial density from doing that. Now, the downside is those 10 to 30 miles are not necessarily at what's called race pace in terms of being able to go fast enough to go under 10. But that's fine. Like I said, it's almost like a conditioning or cardiovascular base that you're trying to build for yourself. I don't run competitively anymore, but funnily, I actually did a high intensity interval training class at Equinox the other day to sort of get back into it. And the first thing that I noticed was I was like, I'm totally in shape for this, but like my, tendons and ligaments and feet were just like getting tired because I was like, I just don't run anymore. And I wasn't doing it consistently enough. I was literally like, I run like probably 2.5 miles a week because I just do 5 minutes of warm up before I lift weights. And I was like, I can't just like go out and run an hour. My heart and my lungs can handle it, but my legs and feet can't. So that's the first thing that I would do. And then on top of that, you want to layer in some what's called speed work or interval training. So that's kind of what you were alluding to. And you want to do that, I would say probably on the order of at least like once to twice a week would be appropriate. And with that, you want to be going at your race pace or a little bit faster. So you don't necessarily need to be going and running 1.5 mile like practice races. You may want to do that like once or twice before the actual event where you have to do it timed for the test. But you can obviously calculate, what mile pace, under 10 minutes is for 1.5 miles. And then you might want to practice, like, for instance, doing like 400 meter repeats at that pace. You don't, like I said, you don't need to do it for 1.5 miles, which would be the equivalent of 6 400 meter sprints, but you can do it 2, 3, 4 times and seeing if you kind of like maintain that pace. You can do it up to 6 times if you're taking a break in between, where let's say you're doing, 1 to 2 minute rest intervals in between those 400s. And then that'll kind of build up your, ability to maintain that pace. It also psychologically like get you used to like how it feels to run at that pace so that you can keep it up. And not be staring at your watch the whole time. And that should be pretty helpful to you. And obviously, like the closer that you get to the actual day, you want to kind of be doing less of that kind of base kind of conditioning work and a little bit more of the interval work. So this is kind of the principle of periodization. So as sort of coaches do programming for events, for athletes, as they approach the event, they kind of reduce their volume so that they're not tired and exhausted and they can do sort of maximal exertion. And they're getting them to do a little bit of more speed work. So you typically see that like in the winter, people do a lot of endurance work. As it gets closer to spring and track season, they're doing a lot more sprint work. So that's generally sort of like helpful principles that come from track and running, racing training that you can do to make sure that you kick butt and get a great time in that event.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a good idea. I guess the only thing would be balancing that with the other training. When the gyms were open, I was doing CrossFit 4 times a week and then lifting 3 times a week. So then having to add all that running and probably have to back off on one of those things.
Yeah, I would say so. I mean, how do you feel about the rest of the PT requirements? Is it only the running thing that you feel like you're not, at where you need to be?
No, I need to increase my push-up count as well. That's part of the test. There's a plank portion. I'm pretty good on that. And the flexibility is a yard sale, so don't worry about that.
So yeah, I mean, what I would do is for the purposes of passing this, I would focus on your weaknesses, which is, look, I would say any other time, like doing weightlifting or CrossFit or 3-4 times a week would be optimal. But you got to go kick butt and pass this test. So I would say for the time being, if I were you, I would like maybe cut down to 1, maybe 2 days a week of full body sort of strength training, just so you're not like losing any muscle mass and you're doing what you need to do. But yeah, I would focus a lot more on the running, because right now you're like 30 seconds away. It sounds like 30 plus seconds away from the time. So you definitely need a lot of work there. 30 seconds is a pretty significant actually amount of improvement. Fortunately, you're a beginner, so it's definitely possible. You should be able to do it. But I would focus that number one. Number two, yes, you should be doing a ton of push-ups. That you may want to do every day, just so you can, ramp that up. And fortunately, like the recovery from doing push-ups is not as bad as running. So, I would definitely be running and doing push-ups every single day. You can do like I said, 1 to 2 days of sort of accessory work just to maintain your sort of strength and muscle mass. And obviously after, you pass your fitness test, you can kind of go back to doing what you're doing. But yeah, I would be concerned if you're trying to do all of that at once. You may end up sort of exhausting yourself or not sort of have the endurance to do what you need to do in that 1.5 mile race. Well, I mean, that's good news for you. So you just basically need to get fit enough, and when you're ready, you can go do the damn thing. So, but yeah, I actually anticipate like in the, if you're doing sort of steady, methodical training and you're getting enough rest and recovery, you should be able to do that in the course of, I don't know, a couple weeks at best, maybe a little bit longer than that, but it shouldn't take too much time. You sound like you're pretty dedicated if you're going to CrossFit or lifting weights 3 to 4 times a week. So I think you have what it takes. And good luck. Let us know how it goes. It's kind of an interesting thing. There's all these articles coming out lately about how people can't pass these physical fitness tests anymore because at least Americans, I won't speak for Canadians, are increasingly out of shape, overweight, etc. And so they're having to like lower the standards because nobody can pass it anymore, which really tells you about sort of the decline of the American male. I was just actually filming a video with Victor earlier today, and there was a very interesting study that actually substantiated this. They were looking at grip strength. And in 1985, young men, so these are the men between the ages of 20 and 34, could apply, I believe it was 117 pounds of force in terms of their grip strength. Fast forward 30 years later to 2015, same age guys between the ages of 20 and 34 could only apply 98 pounds of force. So it's basically like a 16% reduction in strength just over the course of 30 years. And so, it's kind of funny. We've literally become keyboard jockeys that can no longer, shake hands like a man. So it's good that there are still guys, including the ones that are listening here today, that are the exceptions to that rule. Because I think it's very easy to be above average these days, unfortunately.
Yeah, for sure. So I'm looking to, I guess, maximize my testosterone by going to the gym more. And I have this gym in my apartment complex, which is pretty standard. There's like a bunch of dumbbells. They have like a lat pull down. No barbells or anything like that though, which kind of sucks. But I have a 2-day split. And the reason why I chose to do a 2-day split was because I wanted to emphasize my muscles in my legs more to, I guess, enhance testosterone, if that makes sense. And I was just wondering if you could, I guess, like listen to what I have here for my exercises and see if that's like a good base point to start off at.
Sure. Happy to do that. And I'm happy to talk about sort of training frequency and the research literature behind that.
Yeah, sure. So for my leg days, I just have, since I'm only having access to like dumbbells and stuff, I was thinking just doing like some dumbbell squats, some dumbbell deadlifts. And then after that, probably like move into like weighted lunges. And then like, there's like a hamstring curl machine, I guess, that they have there. So I was thinking about doing that. Outside of that, there's not too many things that I could think of to work out my legs with. So that's what I have for like the leg portion of my 2-day split so far. But for my upper body day, I was thinking about doing some pull-ups, some dumbbell bench presses, dumbbell rows, lat pull-downs, and then to end it off, pec flies, farmer carries, and then just curls. So yeah, that's what I have so far.
Awesome. Well, first and foremost, you got to work with what you got. So it's unfortunate that you don't have like a squat or power rack. That's obviously more optimal, but right. You can still get a great even lower body workout in with minimal equipment. And on the other type of podcast that we do when I bring in guests, I actually highly suggest you listen to the podcast that we had with JT, who's a bodyweight strength expert. And you can check out his website and YouTube as well. I'll actually link to it in the show notes after here. But he actually has like leg day programs that you can do with body weight. It's a lot of like single leg stuff that you can do. But even if you have dumbbells, you can complement it with that and do exactly what you're talking about, sort of single leg squats, single leg lunges, and actually still get a really great workout for your hamstrings, quads, and calves. So don't feel like you're necessarily neglecting it. You just have to be a little bit more creative and specific in your programming. But all the exercises that you mentioned sound good. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to flip your question on your head, though, in terms of like, is this the optimal sort of program or routine? And I would say it's probably not if you're trying to. Well, it's unclear in terms of like hormone optimization, but I will tell you what the research is in terms of gaining strength and gaining muscle mass, which is highly correlated essentially with testosterone. So the good news is like there's a bunch of these exercise physiologists and sports scientists who research these questions and do really nicely controlled studies to answer these questions. One of my favorite is a guy named Brad Schoenfeld. I think he's actually active on social media too. And he actually did a study back in 2015 in which he was looking at how frequently do you need to work a muscle group in order to maximize the gains. And there's a common sort of thing, we call it the bro split, which is kind of sounds like what you're doing, where you split, for instance, between upper and lower body, or you do different parts of your body every single day a week. So he actually did a study where he compared, the traditional bro split, where you work a muscle group once a week versus training it 3 times a week. But the thing is, he controlled for training volume, meaning net, the guys in the 3 times a week group and the guys in the once a week group did the same amount of work. So you couldn't say it was because of training volume, but the folks that actually worked out their muscle groups 3 times a week had significantly thicker biceps and quads in terms of the muscle gain that they got from it. They didn't see differences in strength gains, but there was kind of a weak trend that they saw that was not statistically significant in the full body group. So that was a kind of a compelling, difference. And it's kind of an interesting question of like, well, if the volume was the same between the two groups, what explains the fact that higher training frequency basically resulted in greater muscle growth? One kind of theory is that trained muscles may recover faster from untrained muscles. And so, the sort of literature on muscle protein synthesis suggests that like when people work out, they only kind of grow 24 to 48 hours after a workout. So if you're kind of working out more often, you're kind of growing a little bit more sort of consistently. So that was kind of a study that, in my opinion, kind of like invalidated the bro split. And then one of my favorite studies, which I cite all the time, was done by Brad Schoenfeld, but the main author was this guy named Zeroni in 2018. And he compared, so they're like, okay, we know that working out once a week in terms of your muscle groups is not optimal. The real question is, what is the optimal number? Is it twice a week, 3 times a week, maybe even 5 times a week? And so they compared twice a week to 5 times a week. And what the guys did in the twice a week group is they actually worked out 5 days a week, but they split it in like a traditional sort of bro split. One day was a push day, one day was a pull day, and the other 3 days were focused on biceps, legs, and triceps. So net, they kind of hit a similar muscle group, like let's say chest, twice in that week. I believe they only hit the legs once in that week. And then they compared that to doing actually a full body split every single day. So you work all of the muscle groups 5 times a week, but the difference is you do a slight variation. So as we were talking about in terms of chest, one day you may do flat bench, one day you may do incline, one day you may do decline, one day you may use dumbbells, and the other day you might use a machine. So you're hitting it kind of 5 different ways. And they found that doing it that way, a full body split every single day, also, just like the previous study that I mentioned in 2015, had greater increases in the thickness of the biceps and the quads. And also, interestingly, this time around, they found that their 1 rep max squat in terms of strength actually doubled in that group. And I think it was because, the previous group only did their squats once a week. The other group literally hit their legs 5 times a week. And so they got twice as strong as a result of doing that. And so when people always ask me, like, what's the optimal sort of, program design, I actually always point to sort of Menno Henselman's website, which is a great resource. I'll link to it in the show notes after that kind of breaks this down and argues that this sort of split approach, in my opinion, is not optimal. As much as you can, it doesn't matter to me if you're working out twice a week or you're working out 5 times a week. I'm actually a big fan of doing full body training and trying to hit the muscle groups as often as you can. The other principle that was different in this last study is it wasn't sort of volume controlled. And we know that volume, as JT talked about in our previous podcast, is one of the best predictors of hypertrophy. So really, you should be hitting, like if you're talking about number of sets per week, ideally you're doing 10 sets of a particular group. So let's say you're doing traditional 3 sets a day over 3 days, that's 9 sets, right? You should be doing at least 10, if not 15, 20, sometimes up to 25, 30 sets per muscle group per week. Because we know there's essentially a linear association with the increased volume in terms of the number of sets that you do and the increase in muscle growth. So now obviously you got to cater that to like what's realistic. Some people are just not willing to work out 5 days a week. Although I would argue, by the way, you can do it very efficiently. I actually do this. I try to limit the workouts to 30 to 45 minutes max. And so I'm basically in and out of the gym, including transportation, like in an hour or less. So it's definitely doable. But if you only want to do it 2 to 3 days a week, I would actually recommend you try to hit your legs every single day that you're there. Just do something different. So for instance, one day you might want to do squats, or if it's body weight squats. Second day you might want to do deadlifts, or in your case, maybe you want to do lunges that hit the hamstrings a little bit more. And then the third day, do something different. You can sort of do like hip thrusts, for instance, work the glutes a little bit more. So you're hitting kind of your legs or lower body in a different way every single day. But it's better to do that, in my opinion, than just work the legs 1 day a week, because as the research that I cited shows, you're not going to get as much gains in terms of strength, hypertrophy, and probably in terms of hormone optimization if you're only hitting it once a week.
That sounds good. But for like volume though, like I imagine, so if I do what I just read out to you, mm-hmm. I'd have to like take some of these like exercises out, I would imagine, right? So like I would just have to, I guess, figure out like what should I prioritize in terms of like workouts. I can't imagine doing like dumbbell curls on any of these days, because I'd probably want to focus on exercises or movements that like hit more than one like muscle group.
Yeah, I mean, compound movements, you should always prioritize, in my opinion, that hit more than one muscle group. If you want to do the accessory work, like you really want to do some bicep isolation exercises, you can. But I would agree, it's not necessary. So that's what I would prioritize last, unless you're doing it for aesthetic reasons, which is nothing wrong with that. But if you're just doing it, as you said, your primary goal is like health and hormone optimization, focus on sort of compound exercises. But that doesn't mean you can't do legs and arms in the same day. In fact, that's what I'm kind of encouraging you to do. So for instance, if you're doing, like the lunges you're talking about, do pull-ups. Now you may need to take more rest, or kind of figure out how to be able to do that in a feasible way. But I would actually suggest trying to do especially if you're only doing it 2 days a week. I would definitely try to do a full body routine and try to hit it. You don't need to take any of the exercises out, like I said, unless they're accessory sort of exercises. But you may want to like figure out how to vary it, so that, let's say you are doing legs twice that week, or whatever, some sort of pulling motion, that you can do some sort of variation of it. So for instance, you can do pull-ups versus chin-ups, like the one day versus the other day, because it is slightly different.
That was really helpful. I guess one last thing, I just have been like finding it difficult to find an actual scale that is relatively good, mm-hmm. and that doesn't like change every time I step on it. Yeah. Do you have any recommendations as far as like scales? So just to like measure like progress, not necessarily to measure like my weight, but just to measure like just have like a consistent baseline.
Yeah. I think Well, scales are very accurate or very reliable at measuring your body weight. They're terrible at measuring body fat. So none of the body fat scales are very good, quite frankly. The main thing I would do is just find. I'm a fan of buying a Bluetooth enabled scale because the data can go into the app, and make sure that the app can essentially write to Apple's health app. Because if it can do that, then you can like transport your data and put it into different places. So one recommendation I actually give to a lot of people is you can download a third-party app. It's called Happy Scale, and it doesn't matter what brand of scale you use, as long as it has Bluetooth to send the data to your phone, and then your phone can put it into Apple's health ecosystem. Happy Scale can pull the data from Apple Health, and what it does, to your point, it creates a trend line. And so even though your weight may fluctuate 1 or 2 pounds every single day, just from changes in water weight and your electrolyte balance, or maybe you just ate a little bit more on a Friday or Saturday, which most people do, it smooths it out and it gives you a trend line. And so it gives you a much more consistent picture of what's happening to your weight. The other nice thing it can do is it can tell you what the future trend is, which is saying, hey, if you're on the path that you're on right now and you keep going, you'll lose whatever it is, 10 pounds in the next 20 days. And so you can almost like use that as positive future anticipation. So that's generally what I would recommend. There are probably some brands that are just better, like in terms of like Nokia Y-Bings that have good quality scales, but they cost like 3 times as much. If it's really worth it, it's up to you. The software is probably better, but there's scales now that are like Bluetooth scales on Amazon for $20 that you can pick up really cheap. They work just as well. So the most important thing is accessibility of the data, in my opinion.
Sweet. I appreciate it. Thank you so much.
Absolutely. Good luck with the lifting. Let us know how it goes. And like I said, consistency is king. So the best program, as always, is the one that you're willing to do and able to maintain long term.
I'm actually a college student in India right now, and I'm under lockdown. So I just wanted to ask, how can I effectively do cardio? Like earlier, I used to run like 2 or 3 times a week, 5K a day. But now that I'm under lockdown, how can I improve that and achieve the same results that I used to?
Okay, so the question was
at home.
How can you do cardio? You used to run 2 to 3 times a week. And can you not run anymore due to where you are in terms of the lockdown?
Yeah. I can't run anymore. Like I'm at home. I do weight training 3 or 4 times a week, but I'm unable to do cardio as effectively as I used to. Like the results that I got from running were quite significant as compared to what I'm getting right now.
What's the situation? Like they're not allowing people to run outside or what?
Yeah, it's like complete lockdown. You can't even you can just go out for essential activities like getting your groceries and stuff like that.
Yeah.
Not for physical activity.
I feel your pain. Well, that's unfortunate. Is there any possibility of getting like home cardio equipment, like an exercise bike or anything like that? Is that possible?
Not really. I guess lockdown will be lifted in about a month or so, and that won't be quite a smart investment.
I mean, so here's my point of view. So first of all, that's a tough situation to be in, and it's unfortunate. But this is a good opportunity to kind of adapt and figure out another solution. So I'm of sort of 2 minds. One is you can just not prioritize cardio right now if it's honestly very difficult to do and you can't go outside. So I think it's fine. I actually am in the school of thought that I think cardio is overrated. So in terms of my exercise recommendations, I actually, sort of described there's 3 levels of exercise that you need to do: low intensity, medium intensity, and high intensity exercise. Low intensity is, people should obviously walk as much as possible, try to get at least 7,500 steps in a day. And even if that means kind of walking around like in circles around your house, that's fine. Or just being not sitting down, I would say. Low intensity is sort of fine. Medium intensity is kind of weight training, strength, muscle strengthening exercises that you should do ideally 3 to 5 times a week, in my opinion. And then once a week, maybe even once every week and a half, if you're doing some sort of high intensity interval training, or it could just be kind of a sport that's naturally interval based, like soccer and basketball are good examples of you stop, sprint, slow down as the normal part of the routine of the sport, is generally enough. And I don't think actually everyone needs to go jog or run on a regular basis to have optimal health. probably doing some sort of running or sprinting, like I said, once every week and a half is fine. But I actually think it should be at a faster pace, not just kind of slow jogging. I think human beings, even though we are persistence hunters, just in terms of getting the bang for your buck, it's better to walk at a slower pace and run at a faster pace than do the sort of like the weird intermediate of jogging in between. So if it makes you feel better, I'm actually not a huge fan of like multiple days of jogging in the first place. So you could just take the time to focus on your muscle strengthening, weightlifting while you're on lockdown. So that's kind of school of mind, number one. The other possibilities, if you really are insistent, you're like, I miss doing cardio. I like just the psychological benefits. Some people report sort of a runner's high that they get from sort of doing it. You can still do it. I mean, if you have access to internet and you're accessing us right now, then you have access to YouTube. And there are a ton of great channels in which people have guided cardio programs that are designed for doing at home in small spaces. Obviously, there's a lot of exercises like body weight squats, burpees, push-ups, lunges in place, lots of things that you can do that is kind of like a P90X kind of routine that can be very effective. And that's a great example, by the way, of a program by Beachbody that a lot of people is literally designed to be done at home without weights, and it's cardio based, right? It's sort of like at home high intensity interval training. I don't have a particular one that I recommend, but if you kind of search for those terms in YouTube, there's a million programs that are in that vein that you can do that are that are more cardio kind of focused at home workouts. And so I would just pick one of those that you like, follow those along, and do that as a substitute for your running.
Okay, thanks a lot.
Absolutely.
Oh yeah, and I'm not sure if it'll be. It's more related to, I guess, psychology than it would be physiology, but I'll toss it in there. I got two questions. One, just out of curiosity, what value, and I know this ranges from testing as well as endocrinologists and other things, but where would you say, or what's a for total testosterone measurement for nanograms per deciliter would be a reasonable range?
Yeah, this is a good question. I'm actually going to pull up a research study so I can answer this in a very, very concrete way. Here's the thing: it's a little tricky because it depends on where you got your labs done. Technically speaking, every lab actually has its own reference range. So I'll give you an example of this. Like if you look at some of the labs that like Quest and LabCorp do, you could have a testosterone of like 950 or 1,000, and you'd be actually out of the reference range. You'd be considered high, so it's technically above like the 97.5 percentile. The reason for that is because the reference range is literally like every adult that takes the test at a Quest or LabCorp is your comparison sample. Now, if you actually look at like a research study where they're comparing you just to healthy young men who are not overweight and between the ages of 18 to 39, that reference range is going to be totally different, right? And so you can have guys that are, in the 900s and they're still, in like the 95th percentile. So that's the first thing I would just say is it depends on kind of like what your frame of reference is. Like if you don't mind asking, like, how old are you?
43.
Yeah. Okay. In your 40s. Let's just say that. Yeah. So, okay. You're still pretty young. That's what I was saying. Like here's the interesting thing. Testosterone does decline. It actually goes down by like 1% per year on average, but it does not have to actually. If you're a fit, healthy guy, you can actually maintain high testosterone levels well into your 70s and 80s. So that is a general population decline, but on an individual level, it does not sort of have to be that way. So that's something that I would keep in mind too. But in terms of like, total testosterone, I'll tell you some of like the benchmarks when it comes to, like I said, if you're looking at healthy young men between sort of the ages of 19 to 40, you're a little bit over that, but I would say close enough, quite frankly. So like a median testosterone level would be, or like a mean, I would say, is like 724. That would be like a split average. But there's obviously quite a bit of variance. So one helpful rule of thumb is basically you want to kind of be within one plus or minus one standard deviation of the mean, and then you're pretty average. So one plus or minus one standard deviation on the downside would be like 503 is -1 standard deviation, and plus one standard deviation is like 945. So as long as you're between, let's say, 500 and 950 ballpark, you're kind of within a normal range. So that's a rule of thumb. But like I said, if you're a little bit older, if you're a little bit more obese, overweight or obese, or you have other sort of comorbid medical conditions, that average is going to be much lower. Like for instance, if you ask like the American Urological Association, their guidelines put between 450 and 600, and that's kind of like the middle tertile for the reference range for most labs, along with not having any negative symptoms, would be considered a success according to their guidelines. That's obviously lower than the range that I put, but they're working with guys who are like 65 plus, right? So I'm kind of presenting optimal numbers for like healthy young men. But I would say, yeah, if even if you're in that 450 to 600 range, that would still be considered, satisfactory.
All right, cool. And I'll do more research because there's, like you said, all kinds of different factors, and I understood about the different testing centers, et cetera. So the testing center that did this is pretty good. I don't know. Some say that one of the better ones in the country from the resources. But I thought it was low. I talked to the endocrinologist as well, and some neuroscience experts as well. And it's a 178 back a few months ago. Yeah. And that's low. I mean, even according to their ranges, it's low. Yeah. But they said, it's fine. And then because they tested it again a month later, it was 288. And it's just inching into the reference range. But there's a whole bunch of other things, and it's because there's a whole other mess of things we're trying to figure out. But I was always curious when the guy brought up testosterone. I'm just trying to get more data points to better advocate for my health. Yeah, I mean
that's helpful, by the way. Concrete numbers. 178 basically on any reference lab that I would know of would be low in terms of total testosterone if you're talking about nanograms per deciliter. Yeah, you're right. 280, like usually 285 is the bottom of the reference range for like a Quest or a LabCorp, which is the biggest labs in the US. So yeah, you're like a couple points within that range. But that range, by the way, that cutoff is the 2.5 percentile, right? Meaning 97.5% of men would be higher than you. I think you usually have to test below that range twice in order to qualify for treatment under most insurance carriers in the United States. But honestly, if you're at that range consistently, I bet if you went back, just depending on the time of day and how much you slept, you would probably do that. I think net it's definitely low. That's sort of my subjective opinion. I'm not giving medical advice, but I think just based on reference range and research, it's definitely on the lower end. Objectively speaking, like I said, you're at like the 3rd percentile or lower, which there's something going on that you shouldn't, in my opinion, be at that level. You should obviously work with your clinicians to figure out what that is. But yeah, I do think it definitely warrants some sort of intervention, whether that's lifestyle or obviously pharmacological. The other thing I would note though is I personally think total testosterone doesn't paint like a great full picture. Now at your levels, that's low enough that no matter what, that's probably a sign of something wrong. For everyone else, a lot of times you might see actually total testosterone in sort of a much more normal range, like I said, in that 400, 500, 600 range. But what's useful to do, in my opinion, is you should also get your SHBG measured, your sex hormone binding globulin, because total testosterone is not the bioavailable or the free portion. You can actually calculate what your free testosterone is if you have your total testosterone, your SHBG, or your albumin. If you don't know your albumin or it's not tested, you can just use like 4.5 usually, or 4.3, I believe, is the average for most guys. It doesn't fluctuate actually that much for most men. And you can essentially calculate using something called the Vermillion equation what your free testosterone is. Free testosterone, in my opinion, is much more valuable because it's the unbound part of the testosterone that actually can bind to the androgen receptor and sort of have that bioactive effect in terms of building muscle and all the other benefits of testosterone. You can measure free testosterone directly, but unless you're getting the right assay, it can be inaccurate. If you're going to do it, make sure it's an LCMS or liquid chromatography mass spectrometry measurement that's done through a method called equilibrium dialysis. If you go to Quest, the free testosterone LCMS is automatically equilibrium dialysis. It's great that they've made that standard now. If you go to a LabCorp, you have to specifically request that particular assay be done. So that's the only way to, in my opinion, accurately measure free testosterone. The other way, and which is much more common and cheaper, is to just measure total testosterone, measure SHBG, and just kind of calculate it. So you can kind of extrapolate what that is. But to me, I actually think free testosterone is more important for most guys, especially if you're, because two people can have very similar total testosterone levels, but one person has low SHBG, which means they have very high free testosterone. The other person has very high SHBG, which means they have very low free testosterone. And the effects of that in terms of their ability to use that testosterone, and get all the benefits in terms of energy, libido, body composition, sports performance, etc., is going to be very different. You can literally be 2x different in terms of free testosterone with the same total T. So just one thing to keep in mind for everyone listening is one way or another, focus on free testosterone, which is what we do, by the way, at Maximus as well. We look at free testosterone and free estradiol.
Awesome, that's great. And there was another result on there, was bioavailable testosterone, which was I think 66 or 88. It was right in the smack in the middle of their range. I couldn't find the other one on there if they tested for it. Well, some of these are from Quest, some of them are from I'm not sure which, Brigham and Women's, whichever they use. But I'll look into it because I thought, at the time they thought I had a brain tumor, and so they did a bunch of other things along with it, and hormone tests and such all came back pretty reasonable. So they said, and then they did another MRI and said, you healed it yourself. It's gone. Lucky, which I think is good. Yay.
Sure.
But I said, how often does that happen? They said, well, we've heard of it. They've just never seen it, which is great. But there's a lot of other body pains. When choosing a psychologist, how would you advise going about choosing one? Because that's something that seems to be a challenge.
Yeah, it is tough. Unfortunately, there's quite a bit of variance in terms of the quality of mental health practitioners. So I think it depends on a couple things. The first thing I would say is, unfortunately, finances are an issue. The reality, though, is if you're willing to pay cash, you will get a better practitioner. I hate to say it, but 9 out of 10 times that's true. Why is that? Because 90% of mental health practitioners work for themselves, and I would say half of them probably don't take insurance. It's often the better half, including myself. I don't deal with insurance because it's a pain in the ass. They don't pay you what you're worth, and if you're really good, and like my practice is very full, I don't need to. And so, unfortunately, especially with, I would say, newer practitioners, if you can afford it, but that's a big if. You're going to have much more freedom and flexibility of finding better people if you're willing to pay cash and have a direct relationship instead of having, a middleman insurance company dictating your care. But I know that's not available, unfortunately, to all people, and affordability, it makes sense. If you can't do that, I would say one of two things. Obviously, try to find someone within your network and your insurance, or there is another alternative, which is, you can go to like a student or university counseling center. They often have either clinical trials where if you qualify, you can get therapy for free or if not paid, or you can get discounted therapy. They are done by trainees, and so yes, they're less experienced, but they also are very closely supervised by very good practicing, very experienced clinicians, including myself. So I'm a clinical professor of psychiatry at UCSF. I supervise the cases of my residents. And so you're kind of getting two shrinks for the price of one. So that's an alternative if you can't afford it. Okay, so let's put the money aside for a second and let's talk about how do you just find a good person. I'm biased, but I do think doctoral level practitioners are better than sort of master's level practitioners. It's a higher bar, it's harder to get into, and so you get higher quality people. Again, directional rule of thumb, it's associational, but if you're really smart and you're really good, you either become a psychologist or a psychiatrist, not an MFT, an MSW, or I don't know what other sort of things that are out there. The other thing is like a lot of those master's level practitioners do not operate under the licenses, the sort of the bounds of their training. Like social workers are really meant to do social work, not really do like full-blown DSM-5 training. Some people may not agree with that opinion, but I think it's originally true. Same thing, marriage and family therapists are supposed to do marriage and family therapy, not treat anxiety disorders. The thing is, when you're licensed, no one's like sitting there and scrutinizing what you're doing unless there's a complaint. And so a lot of people everyone says they treat depression and anxiety nowadays, even if that's not the original intention of sort of their degree or their training. So that's the first thing I would say. Find someone who's a doctoral level practitioner if you can. Second is look at where they trained. Did they go to a university that you recognize? Did they go to like a UCLA or Harvard or some place that you've ever heard of? There's a lot of, unfortunately, for-profit professional schools like Agrasy, Alliant, Fielding, God knows what these universities are, that are quite frankly degree mills, and if you pay them $200K, they'll grant you a degree. There are great practitioners that come out of those schools that are PsyD programs, or whatnot, but they're very hit or miss. They have really terrible people who graduate from those programs as well. Versus like a UCLA, the #1 clinical psych program in the country that I graduated from, has a 3% acceptance rate and was actually harder to get into than Harvard was, where I went for college. So the people coming out of that are, they work, at least they work really hard. I'll give you that, and they'll probably work hard for you. So that's the first thing. The second thing is make sure they graduated from an APA accredited internship and or fellowship program. And if you don't know if they did, you can ask them and just say, where did you do your residency? Did you just like apprentice under someone random in the community? Or did you go to an APA approved internship or fellowship program? The reason that matters is it's kind of a quality bar. Like the people who quite frankly are good enough, they go and do that because it allows you to basically get a job at an institution. Like you cannot work at the VA, for instance, as a psychologist unless you went to an APA approved internship. If someone didn't, that basically means they're unemployable by the government. So why would you hire someone who the government won't even hire to treat veterans, but you're willing to do so? So that's the second thing that I would look at. The third thing I would look at is make sure they have expertise in what you are, you care about, right? Like I have a couple. I have fellowship training in behavioral medicine, so I literally spent an extra year focusing on psychological and behavioral treatment of patients who have chronic illnesses or medical conditions like obesity and diabetes, right? So my first company, Omada Health, where I was founding medical director, was all about diabetes management, and that was sort of my clinical expertise. I spent 3 years at UCLA working in the anxiety disorders research lab, so I have a specialty in anxiety disorders, so I feel very competent to treat those. And so when people come to me, I'm like, great, you have anything health related? I can treat that. I'm a health psychologist. You have anything anxiety related? Great, I can treat that. I literally trained under like the world's best anxiety disorder expert, Michelle Krask, for 3 years, and I can treat that. But if it's like kids, adolescents, eating disorders, couples therapy, I don't do that at all. I will refer out to my colleagues who are great at that. And I'm like, I just don't do that work, nor would I be the best in the world at it. And I'm not going to work with you if I'm not great at it. So ask them, and people put on their website like what their real. Everyone says they treat these things, but like, do they have documented evidence based on where they trained? Have they written a workbook or a book on it? Or do they specialize their practice in it? You will see practices, for instance, that just do OCD. In fact, I had Dr. Elliott on my podcast who just focuses on like OCD and anxiety disorders, right? I have, in fact, colleagues who just do OCD in kids, and they're super specialized, but they're phenomenal because they do it day in and day out. So I do think like some level of expertise in whatever you're focused on is helpful. These days, like my private practice is basically focused on executive coaching with tech CEOs. So I focus on a very specific population. It's all tech CEOs. And I mostly work with guys because I have a men's health company. And so they come to me with those sorts of issues. So I would say I'm definitely top notch when it comes to that. If it's other stuff, I refer out to other colleagues. So try to find someone who has that niche or that expertise. So that's kind of my guidance for finding a great mental health practitioner.
Okay, awesome. And because I'm a tech CEO, you might say, and among other things. And did you say you went to Harvard for your undergrad?
Yeah, I did.
So you're familiar with so I'm in Boston, and I'm trying to find somebody that's reasonable, and it's ridiculous. I got 42 doctors right now. More now. 42.
I got a referral to you that meets all of the criteria that you mentioned. I actually met her the other day. She is wonderful. Her name is Chloe Greenbaum. She is a licensed clinical psychologist. She's adjunct faculty as well. I think at NYU. And yeah, she has great training. Seems very personable. I can't vouch for her work, but like in terms of her criteria, like her training, it looked pretty solid to me. And she's in Boston.
Yeah.
I think she's in Cambridge specifically.
Okay, that sounds great. I'll check it out.
Her website's premierpsychologygroup.com, so you can check it out.
Got it up right now. Cool. And let's see. I think that was pretty much it. I'm not sure what your timeline is because someone else referred me to a doctor out there. You could say a psychology, but he does a lot of other things. His name's Dr. Scott. But he's more in the Bay Area, I believe it is, San Francisco. I didn't know if that name rang a bell. He was trying to bring him. His practice is Bio-Reset Medical. It does a lot of tech, a lot of Silicon Valley, a lot of people out there, and one of the more prominent tech investors. I recommended with him, but it was more for all kinds of other things,
cool.
Just because neurological and other things. But this is great. I really appreciate it, and thank you. Have a great.
My pleasure. I hope. You find the referrals helpful in terms of optimizing your mental and your physical health. All right. Why don't I ask? This question comes from Ben. Thank you for submitting this, Ben. He says, Cam, can you talk about the history of male coming of age rituals and their importance? Why aren't they as prevalent anymore? And what are some examples of rituals that we can do for young men? So Ben's question is about these coming of age rituals, which in traditional cultures, actually, but for both men and women, designated the transition from adolescence to adulthood. So you may have heard, for instance, in like the Jewish religion, there's a bar mitzvah that they have, or bat mitzvah. And same thing in the Spanish culture. There's a quinceañera and other sorts of culturally kind of focused traditions that usually around the age of like whether it's like puberty or 16, sort of 13 to 16, sort of designates the acceptance into sort of adulthood. And I actually think it serves a couple different purposes. So one, it's kind of like even in Southern genteel society, like women would be sort of their introduction into like their debut, so to speak, in terms of like their on the dating market, so to speak. It sort of served a social and familial purpose as well in terms of like integrating the family into the sort of the community unit as well. But I think for the individual, I actually think it serves sort of a deep psychological purpose in that, adulthood carries with it something very different than adolescence, and that's responsibility, right? And so you have to almost initiate into adulthood in order to carry that burden of responsibility and be a different part of the community in that now the burden of responsibility falls on your shoulders. So it is useful, whether it's like a party kind of thing, which is what it's become, I would say, in sort of modern times. It's usually a celebration, which is great. It's like, okay, we're telling the community that now we're progressing into this new phase of life. In a lot of more traditional cultures, I would say, there was usually a task that was part of the coming of age ritual. So, right, and you see a lot of indigenous or hunter-gatherer societies. For instance, in Native American society, there's a tradition of going on a vision quest, in which you might have to go outside, be alone without food or water for a day or maybe even multiple days, do some sort of task or hunt, complete it successfully. I know in certain African tribal cultures, like for instance, young boys would have to literally kill a lion, and that had to prove their initiation into manhood. So some of these tasks were quite onerous, painful, dangerous, etc. But it serves a very useful psychological purpose, and you even see this in modern sort of groups, including, let's say, the military, right, in which you do Hell Week or a boot camp. It serves not only a purpose in terms of proving your worth in order to join that circle, but to you, it actually ingratiates you. Hazing, even though there's obviously a downside, whether it's in fraternities or the military, also increases group affinity. Meaning, once you go through like a Navy SEAL Hell Week and you prove that you can pass that bar, you're more likely to stick with the SEALs, because you're like, man, why did I go through that effort in terms of cognitive dissonance unless this was really worth joining, right? And so it also, I think, serves that very important purpose as well, as when you go through sort of the initiation ritual, become an adult and a member of the tribe or the community, that rite of passage makes you, bonded with your group, with your community, with the greater part of society, versus like you just kind of feel like you're an individual who happens to be there. And so I think it actually, from a psychological perspective, plays a very important sort of purpose. And it's unfortunate that we've lost that, right? I think, your question about why, I think, modern society has lost a lot of sort of traditions as sort of, the connection with the greater community dissipates and, globalization happens. We sort of lose our additional, traditional cultures. In fact, someone just posted on the Dr. Cam radio show channel about Janai, one of the traditional rites of passage in which a student is accepted by a guru in Hinduism. There's a great, beautiful example of that. And it's literally goes back to Sanskrit texts. So thank you very much for sure sharing that. But the good news is, even if that's not sort of part of your community or cultural tradition, there's still ways of getting that. So obviously, like, the joining of a university or sort of a workplace group, some of those do have actually initiation rituals or rites of passages that you can do. Other examples of those are, there are some men's groups that are out there. Mankind Project and Everyman are probably the two most prominent examples in which you can go off to a weekend retreat, a workshop, and they literally do sort of a modernized adult version of a rite of passage for men. And that can be, I've heard good things. I haven't done it myself, but I've heard good things about that. And another example of that, one that I actually did when I was 22, was Outward Bound. And they do that for adolescents and also young adults, I would say. I went on a really intense 22-day mountain climbing trip all throughout the Sierras in terms of Sequoia and Kings Canyon, where we hiked and climbed 15, 20 miles a day. It was very, very intense. And it felt like a rite of passage, because you had to go through this with a group of like 20 other people. Our guide was like an ex-Marine, super hardcore guy. And it was tough. And I learned a lot of lessons about perseverance, about leading a team, getting through difficult times. One of my friends severely sprained his ankle, had to be flown out, and we had to carry him, take turns carrying him out of there. And you learn a lot about yourself and your fellow man in going through those rites of passage. So it doesn't mean you necessarily need to have a ton of pain or suffer in order to become a man, but I do think you need to do something difficult as part of it. And I don't think it's ever too late to do that. So just because you're not in your 20s anymore doesn't mean if you feel like you haven't done it, you can do it through all of the aforementioned organizations that I mentioned. So rites of passage, yeah, very important even in modern times. In fact, I'd argue they're even more important in this day and age, where we need a greater sense of connection than we ever have before. Great disparate questions all around mind, body, and masculinity. That's kind of what I love about this show. We can talk psychology, we can talk physiology, we can talk cultural anthropology as well. I think that's what makes it interesting for conversation. So thanks to everyone who joined us on Discord. Thanks Alberto, Maya, Ben, Jared, PK, Ryan, Koopa. Thanks to everyone who's watching on Instagram Live, on YouTube, on Clubhouse, Andrew, Joshua, Niraj, and thanks everyone who joined us for the first time on Twitter Spaces. I'll be hosting this on Twitter Spaces every time going forward. So thanks to everyone who's joining us there as well. We'll have this every single Thursday, 6 p.m. Pacific time. So you can tune in, and if you want to make sure that I answer your question and have time for it, submit it in advance. You can always DM me on any of the social media channels. I'll put it in the queue, or you can do it on Discord as well. So thanks everyone. Have an amazing rest of your Thursday, and be well.